Alright, welcome everybody from YouTube. This is Negative1, bringing you a review of the MCS 43 top decks and generally just what happened. If you see here, Resonator's kind of dominating Top Cut. Harpy's only one in all of top 32. If we take a look at the grand finals, it was in fact a mirror match of Shiranui versus Shiranui. If it would load, just give it a second. So as you can see, it was indeed Shiranui versus Shiranui in the mirror match. Shiranui versus Shiranui in grand finals. So what happened? What's going on? Did the meta change? The meta did change. All right. The meta changed. Resonators are the best deck. All right. So just to go over everything, I have these graphics pulled up on MS Paint. So, all right. So before the MCS and before Resonators were released, I think it was pretty fair to say Harpies were the tier 1 like dominant deck of the format. It was most played in every tournament, and it was like generally had the most just like tournament wins, very strong performances overall. Automat was a really close second, however, possibly still tier 2. Thunder kind of trailing. You could switch Thunder and Fire Kings, and I don't think there would be any debate on that. And then Blue Eyes is kind of like a weak tier 3, but it's still there. And then Water is kind of played, but doesn't really see a whole lot of success. However, after Resonators, Resonators getting leaked, and then I'm like, alright, so let's see what cards they have. Okay, these cards, it's nothing really crazy, nothing's going on here, this isn't that good. The night after I do my review, Konami gives us not just, they give us a lot. They give us a new structure deck, they give us a new skill to go with that structure deck, they give us Shooting Star Dragon, they give us a new skill to go with Resonators. They just throw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks, and ultimately Resonators reign supreme out of all of the new support. So why are Resonators doing good? I think the cards themselves, they're nothing crazy, but because of the skill, they are really just excelling beyond what I think anyone expected of them. Just looking at the cards themselves, they're rather unassuming. Just like, what are they capable of? They summon big monsters, and those big monsters, you can summon Dark End Dragon, you can summon Infernity Doom Dragon. Those have decent effects, but generally they're not as impactful as some of the other boss monsters we see in the metagame. However, the real strength in Resonators is their consistency and their ability to run tech cards. So if we go back to the MCS, we look at what did really well in Top Cut. So let's scroll all the way down to the bottom. Just like glancing through, you will see multiple Resonator decks. So you see Psalm Scolding, Book of Moon, Mystical Space Typhoon. All of these things are pretty strong. You also see Treacherous Trap Hold, very powerful card in the meta. So a lot of defense and a lot of tech cards, a lot of consistency, all really strong tools for the deck. It makes it like a very formidable contender. But the consistency provided by the skill just push it from like a meta contender into that like tier 1, like arguably just the best deck of the format. So moving back to MS Paint, because of Resonators defining the format, we have to ask, what does Resonators defining the format change to, you know, like the dynamics of the game? And if Resonators is the best deck, then why was Shiranui mirror match in finals? Neg, explain, please. Gladly. So you see, Resonators have a good matchup against Harpies. They have a good matchup against Automat. They have a good matchup against like Blue Eyes, and they Thunder Dragons. You can discuss a bit about like who wins there, Thunder Dragon versus Resonators, and Fire King. Traditionally, Resonators might struggle against Fire Kings. However, if we go back to the MCS, you'll see that multiple uh, Resonator players are running a mono Awado. It's not just this one. You'll see some running multiple copies of Amano, and Amano essentially just shuts off all hand traps. It shuts off all floating. It shuts off Arvada trying to negate. So really, this just kind of like prevents any sort of like hand trap strategy from really succeeding against them, because at some point, even if like Fire Kings has like Kite Roid or Veil and just wants to wait and have Destiny draw trigger, at some point Amato is going to be drawn, summoned, and then from there no hand traps can be played. So for those reasons, Fire Kings is kind of falling out of the game right now. If we look at the full breakdown, Fire King was actually second most played. It was 18 in total. And then in Top Cut, only one made it. So this is one of the just very abysmal conversion rates. And I don't want to like tie the strength of a deck too much to its conversion rate. However, this is it's not a good look when 18 enter and only one top. There are times when multiple people enter with a deck and none of them top. But for 18 to enter, 18 is like substantial enough that like if this deck is good, more people probably should be topping with it. But it's just not having success to any like expected degree. If we also look at Harpies, what was once like at some point people were discussing, is this deck tier 0? At this point, it's nowhere near that status. If we go back to our MS Paint, you could argue Harpies are like tier 3 now, just because of their matchup against Resonators. And the reason why Shiranui is like eking its way into the metagame is because of the influence Resonator is having. So Harpy, a lot weaker. Automat, a lot weaker. Fire King, a lot weaker. Blue Eyes, a lot weaker. All of these decks are decks that would generally be considered decks that could, do favorably against Shiranui. Blue Eyes can banish or use Karma Cut on Spectral Sword, banish monsters, make it difficult for Shiranui to play. Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon can negate a Spectral Sword Engrave. Automat can run True Nade, so True Nade's back row, then OTKs. Harpies can run Harpy's Hunting Ground, and that just eats through back row. So all of these decks that would otherwise just kind of shut out Shiranui, because Resonator is shutting out all of these decks, Shiranui is coming in with their back row and, just floodgating and Canadia-ing Resonators pretty well. So that is my explanation as to why I think, Shiranui performed very well this MCS. Thunder Dragon, I think, kind of stays around tier 2, just because out of all of the engines, Chaos Dragon Levianeer is probably the best single monster ever printed in Duel Links. Like, just non-targeting blow up 2 cards, and in combination with the Thunder Dragon effects of, well, you summon the Levianeer, but you also banish a Dark, banish a Roar, so you get other cards off of the Levianeer summon. So after all of that, like, Thunder is still able to compete in a meta where Resonator is dominant. However, because Thunder Dragon is as it is nowhere near consistent. It is nowhere near as consistent as Resonators. It still has some tools to, compete. It can run Battery Man Solar, which is a new development. If we go over to the breakdown, a lot of some of these decks are running solar. This build is not. If we scroll down, you will see this one also is not. So just make a liar out of me, sure. But this build, for example, is running Battery Man Solar. So there are multiple ways to build the deck, and people are trying different things. There are multiple options with it. So yeah, Thunder's main weakness, as always, is consistency. So I think that is the main thing holding Thunder back from really being in the same like league or tier wise as Resonators. And then in tier 3, you see I kind of have a lot of decks here. So because Resonator is still somewhat new and it's still like, okay, what beats Resonators? There's still a lot of uncertainty about like, okay, what decks are actually good and what are kind of just like cheesing the format, So I think for the first time, Water XYZ may actually be like a serious contender just because Dweller is able to stop Resonators very well. It has the Dweller Pop, which is obviously always strong. Abyss Dweller starts out at 2200, which gets over a Red Rising. The Dweller effect to prevent grave activations is good to stop follow-up plays from Wandering King Wildwind. So there's a lot of factors that help Water compete against Resonators. Also, they can just run Necro Valley, so, Diva, Necro, Tretch, the classic. So for those reasons, I think Water could be tier 3. This, once again, not too certain on. And then Shiranui is here because it just runs a bunch of trap cards, and Resonators, they want to run Treacherous for the mirror match because Treacherous is such an impactful card. However, ultimately they will prefer, they can't, because they want to run Treacherous, they're not going to run Trunade, and without Trunade, Shiranui does pretty well. So that's why I would say Shiranui is potentially a tier 3 deck. And then lastly, Onomat. I think Onomat is maybe around the tier 3 range just because Resonator is like really good defensively. I think Thunder Dragon is also another good deck defensively. So for those reasons, it's not going to have the best matchup against these two decks. Resonator can generate a lot of life points, which keeps it out of OTK range. I think Onomat doesn't lose to Resonator too hard. They can play a little slower, perhaps try to get more value out of Steel Swarm Roach. And with those tools, they can kind of compete against Resonators. But generally, I don't think they're going to be like the powerhouse that they otherwise would be. And then we have sadly, the get out of my face tier. Fire King and Blue Eyes. I don't think, did any Blue Eyes top the event? But actually, I need to check that. Did any Blue Eyes? Okay, there were 0 Blue Eyes in Top Cut. Did any Blue Eyes, and 1 Blue Eyes enter the entire event? At this point, I think it's safe to say that Blue Eyes is potentially not tier worthy. It doesn't have a good matchup against Resonators because Resonators they summon, like, the Blue Eye strategy is summon big monsters and then hit really hard. The Resonator strategy is summon big monsters and hit really hard, but you do it with consistency and you do it on your first turn and your second turn. So really, Resonators are kind of doing the Blue Eye strategy, but better. So I would say Blue Eyes, unfortunately, I don't think it is quite on the level of the other decks anymore. And then Fire Kings for the aforementioned Amano Awado. I think Fire Kings are definitely just going to struggle. you could argue that they have a decent time against some of the decks here, but like um, just resonators being in the format, using a mono and pushing decks into running more back row. So Shiranui exists, which will run more back row. Water, if it continues to exist, it will probably run more back row. And Harpies, if it continues to exist, it will run more back row. So for those reasons, just a back row heavy meta is not good for Fire Kings. Just because um, generally trap cards are not what you want to see with Fire Kings. You want to see monsters because Garunix can just nuke the board. Um, but yeah, I would say that's my general thoughts. Um, Let me know what y'all think in the comments. I think personally, I think this is the biggest surprise out of the mini in a long time. So yeah, like, comment, and subscribe. This has been Negative One. Thanks for watching.